So, okay, let's look at how to create a simple spending plan, a budget that works. Now, these concepts can work whether you're operating at bare bones survival mode or the comfortable mode where your needs are met, your debt's under control, and more money is going into savings, or even for the lifestyle of the thriving mode. These concepts are all coming from the worksheet tools from this budget kit, which is in its sixth edition. I'm proud to say that this workbook has truly passed the test of time now that it's in its fourth decade, continuously in bookstores and online as an ebook for years. These sample worksheets from the Budget Kit Workbook that I'll be showing are now more of like a graphical illustration of a concept that you can apply to your own system, your own thinking, your own planning. And of course, the workbook or the electronic version of it is still extremely helpful. And if you're currently using the Budget Kit or considering it, listen now from the perspective of these powerful core concepts that are part of those worksheets. Now, back in the 80s and the early 90s, there really weren't software packages and apps for the average consumer, so the worksheets were powerful tools for managing personal finances. And now my message is much more about the concepts that the worksheets demonstrate. In fact, whatever software or apps you are already using will probably work just fine with these concepts. The three core steps for creating a cash flow system. These are core concepts for projecting and reviewing your financial picture. We have a yearly plan for anticipating those periodic expenses, those non-recurring, really meaning periodic expenses. And then there's a monthly picture, a monthly plan, a projection, forecasting, outlining every conceivable expense to be much more proactive and prepared for that upcoming month. And we're not just focusing on averages. And then there's the daily picture, the tracking system, the spending leaks, finding out where's your money going, where is it trickling away, is this where you really want your money to be going, is this spending in alignment with your own core values and priorities. Now, most of the time when people talk about getting started, they tell you, oh, just track your spending for a while. Now, that is a tremendous tool. However, having sat at those kitchen tables for decades, I found that this system of only tracking first is not always the most effective way to start out, especially if you really don't know what to do with that information. And yes, it does give you valuable information. It gives you good insights. You're learning from it, although it's rear view mirror information. So what I started doing many years ago is putting this tracking piece as the third piece and not the first core step. So now let's take a look at the windshield view of a budget, where you start to proactively anticipate and plan ahead. And in this case, its first core step, the yearly plan, it's basically a yearly picture referring not to every expense for the year, but instead a way to proactively anticipate and map out all those periodic, irregular, occasional, and non-monthly payments and expenses that show up throughout the year and seem like complete surprises. And these supposedly surprise or what often seem like emergency expenses can often totally interrupt or devastate your budget. It may be quarterly, semi-annual, or any version of that. Things like tuition, summer camp, property taxes that aren't in your escrow, or scheduled car maintenance or annual memberships, the Costco, AAA, the Country Club, your Amazon Prime. It can be trips or home remodeling projects, whether for starting a family or for downsizing when the kids are leaving the home. Capturing these various expenses and having a proactive plan for anticipating them is a step I often refer to as the missing link. And as it says up here, you're going to have a visual plan for being proactive. You're going to anticipate those variables, which would be key, and then create a reserve account. So let's take a look at the worksheet, what the yearly budget worksheet will look like. So we're looking at a concept again, and let me kind of go over this worksheet and take you on a tour of the core sections. We've got the months, as you can see, across the top. And again, you can outline something like this yourself. And then on the side, we have categories, general categories, your housing, your transportation, your health, and then all those additional non-monthly kinds of expenses. Then you have a total for each one of those categories, giving you a guideline of what they're costing, plus a monthly average. And then you kind of look at the categories. Perhaps your home yard maintenance could be expenses like if you have a pool and you start up the pool in the spring, you get your chemicals, you have startup, you've got summer expenses, and then in the fall you're closing it down. You have various expenses, so those months will show higher amounts. Or maybe you're in some of those areas of the country where you use propane during the winter, and you're filling your propane tanks throughout the year at different times, and you're anticipating and putting down your estimated amount under the month you anticipate that coming. Same for your auto insurance, your auto expenses, when you expect to have your lube job, oil changes, a scheduled maintenance at the 30,000 or the 60,000, and don't forget your boats, your RVs, your motorcycles, different kinds of vehicles. Are there annual storage fees? Are there other kinds of expenses that you're going to have? This is a way to plug these expenses in because they are periodical. Down in the health area, we've got medical copay, or those times when you have to do your deductibles first, or you have certain things, maybe your certain vision or certain dental is not covered, and you'll plug in what month are you going to be having some of those eye exams, or the dental, or the orthodontics where you're still going to be having copays, or maybe you have your 3-month prescriptions that you're covering. Another big area when we get into all the additional areas would be things like the gifts. It's very interesting to have an overview of gifts. In the workbook, in the Budget Kit Workbook, there's actually a whole worksheet just for gifts for a family and then for holiday expenses. The gift area is really one of those overlooked areas. I created a class, a financial literacy class for the Habitat for Humanity here in Albuquerque. It was a hands-on class, and every month the families would come in, and the one session where we were working on this overview, we were working on the gifts. I can still remember that this one woman was filling out the form. She was from a large extended family, and she was filling out every person, their birthdays, their graduations, the holidays, weddings, the different anticipated expenses. And as she filled it all out, she just blurted out, she said, "Oh my God, I'm going to need another part-time job for all these expenses." This tool helps people become so much more aware of the gift spending so that they can start planning more and reacting less when gift time actually comes up. And you can see this is a great way to start outlining, anticipating, and planning for the various other expenses that just seem to come up. For your children, we go down a little bit more. We've got children's activities, there's pets, there's personal care, there's workshops, there's trips, vacations, and you'll have a place to show the month and then what are those various kinds of expenses that they're going to have, especially for the children. If they have activities and camps and hobbies and classes, there's a place to log all that in, especially if they're in the little leagues and the various sports. There's a lot that goes on in families with the children's activities. And the pets, you've got your vet bills or other things for pets, and if you're going on vacation, if you're going to be kenneling them. So it's a place to gather all that. And then as you look, you actually know that most of these expenses are out there somewhere, and they're coming up, but it's really easy to kind of forget to factor them in ahead of time. And it's easy to forget to use the information proactively when you're planning out each different month. So you may have like your, auto 6-month auto insurance up here. You may be paying 6-month auto insurance. Those are the kind of things that could show up. Now, even though many people do factor in some of the bigger periodic expenses, could be auto insurance, could be your vacations and trips, things like that. A lot of times they're still missing many of those other incidental periodic expenses, and they're still wondering, why is my budget off? This worksheet and mainly the concept of it is where you identify those budget buster expenses that are humming away in the background. They're not in your face every month, yet somehow those expenses show up. They seem like an emergency. They may end up blowing your budget and landing on your credit card year after year with higher balances, which often can end up being an emergency. But actually, you do know about these expenses ahead of time. And then we look at the bottom. Every one of these months is being totaled up. And you can see some months are going to be high, some are going to be not so high. Maybe starting in January, you have about 475. But February, March, you're over 1,300, over 1,700. And then by May, it's settling down to about 500, or July is 500, or October is about 460. But in September, you're at 1,300, November, you're at 13, December, you're at 1,500. And you can see clearly when you're going to have more expensive months coming up, so that you can start to think proactively in terms of how will I prepare for those expensive months. And then the other way to look at it is a whole grand total. If we look at all the expenses in this particular sample, we have a total expense of over $13,000. And then if we divided that by 12, we can see that would come to a little over $1,100 a month. And what I often recommend is that we have a reserve savings fund just to prepare for these periodic expenses. And granted, people don't necessarily have that initial $1,100 to be putting aside for these expenses. And you may have to just pick some of these higher amounts, and put money aside for those. But the idea is to have some way that you're anticipating this and having a reserve savings account. And this is why I encourage people, when they get their tax return or some bonus money from their jobs or inheritance money, start looking at this and realizing, okay, I might want to put a big chunk there just to seed that reserve savings fund and have some money in there. And this periodic yearly expense concept generally takes a lot more time to go over, whether I do it for groups or individual clients. But for now, I want to just help you get this basic idea of a reserve savings, a monthly amount, having a visual of all of this. It's a very powerful visual concept that has helped numerous individuals and groups that I've worked with, like a recent hands-on program I did for a local attorney's office. The office manager there was saying, he had been introduced to this concept many times, but he said this is the first time it really made some sense, the way it was presented and visually how it was presented. But now I just want you really to be aware, this is not your monthly budget. These are not your monthly expenses. When you write all these periodic expenses down under each month on one piece of paper or spreadsheet or software, you start to realize that all of these expenses are above and beyond the normal day-to-day monthly budget. And that's when you start to realize why those credit cards have filled up, or the home equity line of credits have been taken out to cover the cards or the added expenses that came up throughout the year. And many times, having this visual information in one place can also stop. Hold on here. It's going to stop the finger pointing with couples who usually think the other person's the one who's doing all the spending. I know I work with a lot of couples, and money is a huge emotional trigger. When you're looking at this information together, objectively, both parties get a much more realistic picture of what it takes to run a household and a family. And that's the idea. The idea is to have this process that you work together and you start to redirect your focus back to the team effort as a couple. Stop the finger pointing. Get back on the same page to resolve the shortages. Come up with some constructive solutions. I remember working with one couple who had started with a bit of an edge about that other person's spending, a little blame and a little finger pointing. But by the time we finished outlining their periodic expenses and pulling that whole picture together, like that worksheet I was showing you, both parties realized that they both spend money in their own ways. And the wife said, "Oh my gosh, I'm excited and depressed at the same time." So as we look at this worksheet and this concept, you can see why someone can be excited about something like this, because now you've got some knowledge. It makes sense. You have insight, which is exciting and is empowering to finally see it, and you understand what's been going on over the years. But it's also depressing to face that picture and then to figure out, well, what changes need to be made. And I now realize that I was literally a pioneer with this concept over 30 years ago, but I didn't realize it then. I mean, this periodic planning approach did not exist in the basic personal finance books in the early years in any kind of clear, understandable format. And it's truly a very deceptively simple concept, yet it's a powerful tool and concept, and actually for years has been the missing piece in so many budgets, and it still is when I work with people. And even though there are now many resources with references to periodic expenses, this visual still seems to convey the message most efficiently for people and groups I've worked with. And this concept is truly the cornerstone for a good, solid budget plan, which is why I like to start with this yearly budget concept as we go over budgeting. And for some people, this idea, comes very quickly, this whole concept. And for others, I realize it just takes a while to absorb it. And I don't have time to go into more of that now, but I do offer a variety of coaching approaches to address all these concepts I'm going to talk about, which you can find out more on at the Money Tracker website. And I also have some information at the end of the webinar. But remember, you're always welcome to call me or email me. And now I'm going to shift gears to what's happening in your household on a monthly basis, and where you're probably in much more familiar territory. And that would be the second core step, the monthly plan.